Hi, Dan.
Okay. Hi, Alexei.
Nice to
It's,
see you. And
it's good
I
seeing
want
you.
I want to say some words before we start. So, as you know before, you are invited to an interview as a part of the international study of the features of Gestalt therapy training, which is being conducted by a team of researchers from the Gestalt Research Association. And I, Alexey Vinogradov, am leading this study, and today I will ask you some questions. And this interview will be recorded and, with your permission, will be used for our research purposes and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel of Gestalt Research Association, so that a wider audience can get acquainted with your approach to organizing Gestalt therapy training processes. So, do you agree for
I give
recording?
full consent,
Yeah, great. Thank you.
and I appreciate uh, being invited to participate in this and offer what I can.
Yeah, I want to ask about your experience and your view, and first questions actually about yourself,
Yeah,
about you. So, could you tell about yourself, how you became a Gestalt therapist, what your educational background is, and how you became the director of New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy?
sure. Be glad to. Uh, every Gestalt therapist has a different story of origins and where he or she came from and how we moved towards Gestalt therapy. Mine is, I think, always a little different. I was a lawyer before I practiced. I practiced law, for commercial litigation in New York City for about 7 or 8 years, and before I found Gestalt therapy. And my background as such, I studied literature and history and philosophy as an undergraduate. I did some graduate work in English and American literature, and then I began feeling a calling to some more serious, more grounded, more available ways of being in the world, and law seemed appropriate. It was also the time during the Vietnam War, we spoke for a moment ago about social context, when it was a real possibility for young men to be drafted and sent, although we could get a student deferral. So there was a strong impetus to continue studying, and I needed to know where I was going to study. On the one hand, I was thought about getting a PhD in literature, but on the other hand, I thought, well, there aren't many jobs in this area, and what am I really going to do? So I decided to become a lawyer. I went to law school, graduated, passed the bar, and had a various number of law jobs as a lawyer. And I enjoyed a lot of the practice of law and disliked a lot of it. By characteristically, I wasn't drawn to issues of business and money uh, uh, or conflict for the sake of conflict. I enjoyed the give and take of a legal argument, but I didn't enjoy the kind of fighting that had to be done to win for a client. And you never win large enough or soon enough, and you always lose too soon and you never have the sense of appreciation. I never had that. So then I started to look around what I could do to balance my sense of dissatisfaction as a lawyer. And I found a counseling center in New York. I had just finished, I suppose almost 10 years of psychoanalysis that helped me get over the bumps of adolescence and move into young adulthood. I stopped that and felt I had so much information about myself and my sensitivity and my attunement to the world. I needed to help people. So this is probably in the mid 1970s, I found an organization that was doing counseling for a gay and lesbian population. And I became a counselor there. I didn't know at the time that this organization was founded by members of the New York Institute of Gestalt Therapy, that some of the senior trainers were all Gestalt therapists, and the training that I was getting, without even knowing it, was Gestalt therapy training to become a counselor in group process, individual counseling, and being humanistically approaching one another. And so somebody said, "Why don't you read this book and read this book?" And I was getting too curious. Then I joined a practicum in the practice of Gestalt therapy, since there seemed to be an extension of my counseling skills. I studied with Patrick Kelly first, who was a fellow of the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy. His therapist had been Laura Pearls, so he came from the Laura Pearls tradition. Patrick was kind of a magician. He couldn't articulate a thought clearly, yet his brilliant work was, he said, where did that come from? At a certain point, he said to me, I remember the day, he said, we're in a group, I was sitting in a circle. He said, it's time for you to go upstairs. Because he was living in one apartment in a building, and one stairway away was Richard Kitzler, who was um, known as a philosophical tradition of Gestalt therapy, a clear, sharp thinker, rigorous. So I went up and joined his study group, and I decided to go into therapy with him. So that combination was very powerful, and I discovered that I could take the risk and follow what was fulfilling and interesting and exciting, and leave behind the kind of deadness and troubled deadness of my legal practice. So I began to study to be a therapist. And I studied with Richard, and then I studied with Laura Pearls back then, and also Isidore Fromm was in that tradition. These were the pillars of my groundwork. Um, I eventually started to get therapy referrals, and I began to build a small practice, and then left the practice of law, and then went to social work school, which was the easiest degree to get that would give me the kind of credentials that if ever psychotherapy was licensed, I could hold on to my practice. That was sort of harmless. I got from Patrick a kind of intuitive mysticism. I got from Laura a kind of gentle sense of support and sharpness, you know, and sharpness. I got from Isidore a precision of Gestalt therapy as a finely chiseled tool to take apart experience. And I got from Richard all of the questioning and depth and precision and impulse, eccentricity, brilliance. Um, uh, 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 he encouraged us eventually to question everything. That was Richard's mind. Question everything. And he even did that. He went from being a absolutely orthodox, loyal Pearl Cephalon Goodman devotee, just questioning the very assumptions of it. And I followed that track along with him. I suppose Richard was the most important influence on me. I say that, and immediately behind Richard stands Isidore and Laura. I can almost sense when I work, when I'm feeling uh, their energy, in my understanding. But Richard encouraged me to be the iconoclast in Gestalt therapy that I was from the very beginning. I never felt as a lawyer that I was accepted by people whose primary take in the world was feeling and impulse. Mine was feeling and impulse and intellect. So I was always felt a little bit of unwelcome. Um, and I was also questioning everything everyone just assumed. And which is my style as a Gestalt therapist. It's my style as a Gestalt teacher. It's my style of understanding Gestalt therapy because I resist orthodoxy. All of my life, I resisted all kinds of orthodoxy
Mhm.
wherever I found it. And the orthodoxy of Gestalt therapy was as bad as the orthodoxy of any belief system. And if Gestalt therapy means anything, if it has any utility, it's only because it connects to human experience, only because it still has a live connection to experiencing. And when we stay in the method, in the notion of this is what Gestalt is, we risk that kind of rigidity.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of my take on the world of Gestalt therapy. I question, there's putting there's a I might try to assemble a book of my writings. But the problem with that is to take my writings over the years. I look at them and say, well, I don't believe that anymore. So the only way I could do this is by having a dialogue with myself in writing and question everything. Because uh, uh,
Mhm.
it's hopelessly, compulsively questioning. But
Mhm. Okay. And was it difficult to lead a private practice in that time as a Gestalt therapist?
New York was an interesting situation. Yes and no. I mean, the yes is it's always difficult to develop a practice, uh, and but we're in New York, and New York is a cultural diversity. So while people were intrigued by analysis, like Gestalt therapy was still eccentric and on the fringe, but it was for that reason it was also powerfully attracting people. But New York State, the state in which I practice, is different from other states. We didn't license psychotherapists back then.
Mm,
We at all. Um, and even now, you're not licensed by modality. You don't get licensed and known as a Gestalt therapist or a Jungian therapist or cognitive behavioral, but we license the credentials. So I'm licensed as a clinical social worker. Some people are licensed as mental health counselors now. There's a creative arts therapists, but they could practice any modality and pass the licensing exam and practice. So
mm,
my most people that I worked with for decades really didn't come to me because I'm a Gestalt therapist, and maybe didn't know I was a Gestalt therapist until as we moved along, they began to be suspicious. But now, actually, interestingly, psychoanalysis is the only modality that is licensed, which
mm,
speaks to how powerful their lobbyists were in the state. You
mm.
know, but now with my website, everybody knows who I am. So they come in immediately. I had a consultation last week, and she's kind of waiting for me to do something to say the words here and now. And she said, "I know I'm not supposed to talk about that." And I said, "Trust me, you are." Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you. And what about how you became the director of the
Yeah. Actually,
university?
it's president, and
President, sorry.
there's a big and there's a difference. A training institute would have a director, like a director of training.
Uh-huh. So
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask, is New York Gestalt Institute a training institute?
No,
So,
no,
mhm,
no. And this is an interesting question. I've written a couple of things on that. Is the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy a training institute? No, but we're an institute where training happens. We think
mhm,
of ourselves as a place of teaching and learning, where the experience of contacting, of teaching and learning produces training, produces whatever we call training. From the very, very earliest day, and these are our roots in Pearl's husband and wife, and Goodman. In our earliest days, we began with anarchy. We did not want a credential. We didn't want to set up a standard of what a Gestalt therapist was. We didn't want to get into the bureaucracy of being a training institute, the hierarchy of being a training institute. From the very, very beginning, we were just an organization of people informally who came together. And that was 1951, because we were born the same year Pearl's Heffernan and Goodman was published. So, and we continued that way, that kind of unstructured way of meeting. We never had an office. We met where we met, sometimes in people's apartments, sometimes rented space. Now it's all online, so that our office is now wherever we are. I used to say our office is wherever we are. Wherever we gather is our office. You could get together now in Europe, and that's a meeting at the New York Institute. Doesn't matter where you are. But we were undemocratic in an ironic way in the earlier days because we were run by a council of fellows who were the major names you may know. And then that became, it was a pushback, and now we became an organization where the fellows have no role except as an honor that you're a fellow, and we're run by the membership itself. But we resisted formal training all the time. An exception is that we differentiate between our members, everybody, and those members to whom we can make therapy or training referrals or supervision, so that everyone, no matter who or reason, can join the institute. But to receive referrals, to be recognized as a therapist, trainer, supervisor, we have a little process, and we change and we acknowledge a lot. And we have all kinds of strange obsessive criteria about that, which are always going to be up for grabs and change. It should be changing.
mhm.
But we need to find a way to just make that differentiation, not to credential, but just to notice that there are differences among us. And those some people for whom we're comfortable, we can make referrals to as an institute, and those who are not, we just don't do that.
Mhm.
That makes a big difference. So that training isn't done by the institute, it happens at the institute. I train, my colleagues train, but not not with the authority of the institute behind us, but with our
Yeah, yeah.
personal.
So this institute don't gives like psychotherapeutic education and document and so on.
No.
It's more like association of
Yes,
experienced
that's right.
Gestalt therapists.
That's why I said it's president, not director.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And I was president in 20 years ago,
Mhm.
and now I'm president again.
Mhm. So, um, how do you became a president then and now?
I don't remember how I became president before. How did that happen?
I mean,
I know, I'm laughing because I don't remember. It had to have been a moment where I said, "Hey, I want to be president." It had to have been. Yeah, it was
people choose you, or what's the
yeah,
procedure?
it's chosen. Everything is by consensus. So that we don't have an election. I wasn't elected president. I was chosen as president. So
Uh-huh.
that by then, and this was the early 2000s, I guess it was now. All of my friends, my closest colleagues, had already had their turn at being president, and felt like this was a time I wanted that. And it was again a kind of a developmental. I was taking the tradition that my teachers were in, and I sort of assumed my stature. Um, I found some stature,
Mhm.
stature, is that the right word? Presence. I felt a role that I was fulfilling, and it felt right to me. Uh, and I remember that. I remember that it was we had our 50th anniversary conference. And that was and I gave a welcoming. And it was the very, very first time I spoke in front of a group. We had 120 people there.
Mm.
I was nervous. I didn't know whether because I always had that background that I really don't belong here. I'm a lawyer. I'm not these people. And as soon as I started, I realized I was very comfortable and it felt right to me. And ever since then, I don't have I don't
So
get
it
anxious.
suits you, this role.
Don't get anxious.
Mhm. Okay. Um, can you tell more how New York Institute is organized and what about the structure and structure in fact and structure de jure? I mean, is it private organization or
Yeah.
another
Uh-huh.
kind of organization and how it works?
Yeah, we're a private organization. We're licensed by the state uh, as a state education department, and our purpose is to educate, develop, and communicate what Gestalt therapy is.
Mhm.
We're not licensed to train therapists. That's a different licensing. We require a clinical director, require a medical director, require all kinds of filings with the state. So we're licensed as this kind of an educational organization. We also have tax exempt status from the federal government because we're not for profit. We're not owned by anybody. We just a not for profit organization. We don't, uh, we collect dues from our members. Uh, we, there was a time that we tried to say, well, we really don't need this money. Make sure we spend it by the end of the year, and then we begin all over again. And there's no necessity. We don't have again, no office, no telephone. People want to come to New York and see our office. I don't want to know.
It's linking to Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Uh-huh.
members pay dues.
Uh-huh. Okay. And what values does it hold? Does hold New York Institute, and what makes it unique?
Yeah. Yes. Uh, I always because I feel strong. I guess I feel strongly about this. We have a history. We when I like to think of us as the institute that's alive in time. That we're holding it. We're connected to the historical roots, New York roots. We're connected to all the teachings of our members as we've been developing Gestalt therapy for the first, God, long time. We were committed to the Pearl, Heffernan, and Goodman model, and we were resistant, aggressively resistant to other models of Gestalt therapy. Now you have the East Coast, West Coast split back then in the United States. And you also had the popping up of other institutes that were trained. But like Isidore Fromm would train institutes in the United States, and he'd come back to New York and complain that they took his ideas and turned and made it simplified it. They took the ideas from Pearl, Safran, and Goodman and turned it into almost like a manual. They took one of the central notions of our understanding of Gestalt therapy, of the theory of self and the sequence of contacting, and they would turn it into a cycle of awareness and the things you can almost in your sessions figure out. So we were resistant to that kind of what was called dilution of Gestalt therapy. Laura would say that there's no, she doesn't want to hear about Gestalt and bioenergetics, Gestalt and any of the other psychodrama. It's Gestalt therapy in which that gets integrated, not interjected, but integrated. So there is this coherent Gestalt therapy. We developed attention to group process, the notion of field, where we understand the individual is of a field, that every I is of a we, and we pay attention to that in our group's development. Um, uh, for a while, I was a dominant notion in Gestalt therapy, the individualist model, and we shifted our focus as well away from that into the notion of the field-oriented model, which is sort of basic in Gestalt therapy. So when I wonder why the New York Institute draws members, one of the th reasons I think is that people want to be connected to that kind of a version of evolving Gestalt therapy, evolving from a central core with attention to who we were in the present as part of who we are and leading forward to who we will be and not having breaks, but having a continuity. Now, that's my interest in phenomenology. Having a continuity of a theory of thought, of presence that reaches back, moves along like a snowball down the mountain, collecting whatever is there, always growing, always collecting, always changing, always moving, but always having a consistent shape. And that's the Gestalt, the New York's model. Right now, half of our membership not only is not New York, but is European. We just got somebody from mainland China joining. So why are they joining the New York Institute? They don't want to live in New York City, uh, uh, especially now. But they would like to affiliate with the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy and what we have been doing. That's my best wish.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. And I want to add about uniqueness that it's a first Gestalt Institute in the world, as far as I know.
Yeah, we are. We were absolutely the first.
So you keep traditions and keep many information or many traditions from very beginning.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah. The ones that still feel alive, because we're not a museum.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I see. Okay. And what are the biggest challenges your institute faces overall, and what challenges do you face personally as its president?
yeah. Uh, we for our first challenge was obviously COVID. Yeah. How do we maintain an organization that used to take fulfill its identity, live its identity, be with one another together, face to face in regular meetings in New York, in which we developed our theory of group process, our theory of field, and our sense of the warmth of human connection. That was very much the core of the New York Institute still is, but we were able to put it into action with each other we were meeting body to body. But COVID hit, and immediately, how do we go through that change? How do we move the transition? And we obviously we became an online presence and spread that out. So the challenge, well, the question is that the direction people want to go in? What about the people who have been left behind in New York? The people who are maybe who want to come to New York to be face to face with one another and develop themselves, get identity there. Now, have we left them behind? These are the challenges I think the organization has right now, and to pay attention to that. We've never successfully, hardly ever even unsuccessfully, had a hybrid meeting. It's hard for a volunteer organization. We're all volunteer, and we're
Mhm.
not a training organization. People don't have a commitment to get their training done. So it's a casual organization. How do we mobilize our efforts to pull something like a hybrid meeting off? You need people to do the equipment, you need people to rent the space, you need and but we're all volunteers, and volunteers tend not to volunteer.
Mhm.
They tend to be passive. So we have to get that moving and pay attention to who may be left out.
Mhm.
We're having our anniversary conference. Well, gosh, exactly a year from now, we will be celebrating it being over. But the first week of June next year, we're having it in New York City, face to face. And we have to have it hybrid. Our time zone is a New York time zone. It'll be, what time will it be in Kyiv? It's your organization, it's your meeting too, it's your conference too. We
Mhm.
have to make room for that too. We have to make these kinds of transnational adjustments. Those are the challenges.
Mhm.
I'm happy to say that our existence is not a question. We have more members than we ever had. And every day I get new notifications of members coming,
How
joining.
many members?
We have probably around 130 right now.
Mhm.
uh, uh, give or take. We always said, it's always this time of the year people have to renew, and we go over our numbers. But we have about 130 members. I think
Mhm.
at this time, usually we have about 70, 60, 70 active
Mm.
members. So
So it's mostly two times more.
yeah, I think something like that. I don't have the direct
Mhm.
numbers of that, but something like that, maybe yeah, rarely
Mhm.
over. Yeah, no, yeah. And I have every reason to think we'll get more.
Mhm. Mhm. And what's the biggest challenge for you personally
Yeah, as a president or as a therapist.
as a president of Gestalt
Well,
in your case?
holding that together,
Uh-huh.
holding it together, and trying to articulate. That's what I see my role as articulate a vision of the New York Institute and a vision of Gestalt therapy that is inclusive. I just took a breath, swallow, inclusive, but also serious. One of the things of our values is that we're not we're an embodied, thoughtful organization with critical thinking and critical experiencing, not one that goes with fashion and goes with um, if you're going to present at the Institute, you ought to be able to say what's going on in Gestalt therapy terms.
Mhm.
And those are always it's always the question when as we're pulling together a program for next year. So you can know exactly how much weight is this in terms of our of what we understand Gestalt therapy is and will be. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Are we diluting it? Yeah.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
is yeah.
Yeah. So it's like be actual, be in the pulse of time.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And there is some questions for you as a Gestalt therapy teacher. And first and important question for this study is who is a Gestalt therapist and how would you define this role?
Yeah. Um, it's a hard one because we don't have a standard definition. I have my own. Gestalt therapist is somebody who's experiential and at the very heart of Gestalt therapy is contacting. A Gestalt therapist is paying attention to contacting as it develops in any manifestation, in any form, in any shape. To move away from that is to move away from the core of Gestalt therapy. that contacting is the heart of Gestalt therapy. A Gestalt therapist is someone who stays away from explaining experience, but more with the uncovering, exploring, developing novelty experience, uh, uh, shape of experience. Gestalt therapy stays away from a medical diagnosis, which is also useful as a therapist, but stays away from that in the work with the patient and develops each person's different style of therapy from within the therapy session. A Gestalt therapist is someone who pays attention to what it feels like to be sitting in a seat with the patient. It pays attention to feet on the ground and pays attention to the rhythm of the back and forth of therapy. But what differentiates us from all experiential therapies is that although that sounds similar, we see it in terms of the process of contacting.
Mhm.
That's our guide. That's our shape. I was in a study group with Donna Orange and other contemporary psychoanalysts. Was a contemporary psychoanalyst, another psychodynamic. I made a lot relational, have a lot in common. The overlap is substantial these days, more than ever before in the practice of Gestalt therapy. We have a lot in common with other modalities. But the difference is our close attention to the phenomena of psychotherapy. Our sense of ourselves as clinical phenomenologists is unmatched. Because if we take that seriously, and every moment is a moment of novelty, every moment is a moment that opens up to the next moment, and that's the process of Gestalt therapy. Not appealing to my thoughts about
Mhm.
my hunches about the unconscious, but working with whatever is emerging. Now that's also a perfect session. I think maybe I've had two perfect sessions in my life. So don't get me wrong.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Okay, thank you for these ideas and definition. And can you say more about how is Gestalt therapy education generally structured, and what are its advantages and
Yeah,
disadvantages?
yeah, yeah. I've had the opportunity to be adjunct faculty at a number of Gestalt therapy training programs, and um, uh, well, their difficulties are staying away from rigidity of a model. They tend to have I can't generalize that much because it's unfair. It's always changing. But if they have a particular Gestalt axe to grind, as the New York Institute used to have, if they have a particular axe to grind, they're closing doors. They're closing doors of diversity of thinking and processing. Um, there's a s- there's an is an inherent notion of step by step in a therapy training, which could get in the way of an organic developing. And the extent that you have this and that and this and that, and then you graduate, could lead people to think in terms of a measured, quantifiable, almost a digital process rather than the analog unfolding of growing. Uh, People graduate institutes and they disappear. They don't care about theory or practice. They just do what they do. So somehow if that's true, that's true for other modalities. What has been missing in their training that to encourage them to continue and to identify with the process of exploring and developing the very modality in which they were trained? That's actually maybe a challenge for the New York Institute when they probably never ever get near a meeting. But that's the identity of a Gestalt therapist. Are the institutes teaching an identity of Gestalt therapy? I find that a fair number of institutes, trainees have no idea that there are Gestalt journals, have no idea about all of the Gestalt conferences. They're just in their little niche, in their little niche. And it took some pushing to get members of other institutes to talk about the New York Institute. as a place that welcomes such openness. Um, it took some pushing to get journals read by other institutes. Uh, and I think this is probably true. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so this you saying about disadvantages that some institutes are like close communities and it's difficult to go outside to
Yeah.
explore another approach styles of Gestalt therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And because there, this that uh, institutes have a commercial, it's implied a commercial issue in interest. A person's trained not because they're interested in learning Gestalt therapy, but because they're finding this is the step for them to become therapists, and they need to graduate a training institute. So I'll pick this one because I want to make a living as a therapist.
Mhm.
That wasn't my training. My training was I want to study this because it's interesting to me.
Yeah, but as far as I understand, in your time it was very difficult,
Oh yeah.
different situation with
Oh
this
yeah.
institute laws and so on. Yeah.
Absolutely. I don't hold that against them. I think, of course, this is true. You do. Why did I go to social work school? I did it precisely that way. I didn't want to become a social worker. I wanted to get that piece of paper so I can continue to practice as a therapist.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what about advantages of the education of Gestalt therapists?
Oh yeah, one of the things is a formal institute has that the New York Institute doesn't have is a regular community. Our community has to always kind of restart and continue, restart and continue. They have it right in there, in the very structure that I was just complaining a little bit about. You have the support for learning. You have a support for regular meetings where you engage. They go to residentials. We don't have residentials. They go to a way in which they develop with one another in a more practical way. We have that. We try for that and we get that and we do that, but theirs is at the core. Theirs is at the core. And there's something to be said for being part of a formal community, that you know where you are,
Mhm.
and to have regular faculty.
Mhm.
Oh, I
Mhm.
just took this with him. I took that with her.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Um, how do you think what difficulties do Gestalt therapy students encounter during their training, and how do you help them overcome these problems and difficulties?
Sometimes they get confused by the different voices in Gestalt therapy. Who to follow, who not to follow. Am I following this model? Am I not following this model? Another question would be, do I fit in with other? It's very common. Do I fit in with this group? How do I, um, um, if I'm not intellectually oriented, if I didn't learn, if I didn't have, uh, if I had a troubled relationship to formal learning, how do I then te accept being trained as a Gestalt therapist in a formal way? And I find, or the reverse, if I'm expecting, if I have an academic background, I expect an academic presentation. How do I handle this kind of lazy? They say I'm putting a bias, a kind of a laziness in kind of going with the flow kind of thing. How do I balance that? Because I'm thinking about other practical things, relationship to other modalities, a question about the economic issue. Am I learning a modality? Am I learning a profession that I could do something with? These are always questions that would be in a training institute's mind. Um, yeah.
Mhm.
And when you have faculty and supervisors and supervisees and therapists all in the same room,
Mhm.
there are potential ethical questions.
Mhm. And how you help overcome these challenges as a Gestalt therapist trainer?
Yeah, you have to acknowledge it that there are every modality has something like this, but we have to pay attention very closely to abuses of power,
Mhm.
where the therapist is the expert magician, and I always tell this story that
Mhm.
my first day of an adjunct in one course at an institute. And this is not, I'm not saying something that's done in the institute is an issue, but this is something I think common in Gestalt therapy. Introduce themselves, and he said, "My name is Joe, and I'm told I don't make contact." Now, look at that phrase. I am told, which means there are some experts judging whether or not he's making contact, whatever that means. But somehow he's interjected a deficiency and he put it in Gestalt therapy terms of the dominant majority, rather than being whatever the experience was. And my response to him, I said, "Joe, what are you doing now?" And he immediately got teared up, that I was actually taking what he said as serious for being what it was and not what it wasn't, whether it,
Mhm.
which is kind of a thing that happens. That's inevitable, the power issue of expert trainee.
Mhm. So you told phrase abusing power. Yes? Can
Yeah.
you say more
Yeah,
about it?
I think it happens in every training institute, as far as I know, and that when you have the knowledge that you're teaching, if you don't acknowledge that it's that it is a hierarchical given,
Hmm.
accept that hierarchy as I am the expert, you are not. You're going to reinforce that power dynamic.
Hmm.
But to empower the challenging by the student, that if you pay attention to this hierarchy, has to be fluid and temporary, that it's a kind of a teaching learning. An institute can't be as fluid as that because they're giving that they're passing power to the next power, but they're not as open to that challenge back and forth. Now I'm imagining this. I can't. If you ask me to just give you examples of this, I won't be able to. I'm just making these assumptions. Now I'm not at all critical of the formal Gestalt therapy training at institutes.
Hmm.
But I am critical if it ever is at the point of not being open to challenge, questioning, and fluid hierarchy.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not unique to Gestalt therapy, and it's
Hmm.
not immune in New York Institute. We have a
So,
reputation for being
so
authoritarian.
this is a challenge point to different Gestalt institutes in your view, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And different ways and different forms. Again, I have to keep underscoring this is not being critical of them, but
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
at more institutional in the nature
yeah.
of the institute, and
Uh-huh.
that the New York Institute had as well.
Uh-huh. Hmm. Um, how is the professional identity of a Gestalt therapist formed during training?
Yeah, uh, in a spotty, uncertain way. I don't. When you ask the question of what makes a Gestalt therapist, you'll have different answers from different Gestalt therapists.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think that we're searching for that core. And I don't think, again, I'm wondering, do uh, institutes, Gestalt and otherwise, teach what it means to be a such and such? And do they teach the through line? I think sometimes they teach, you'll hear the Gestalt therapy is, the I thou, and that's it. Or it's being here and now, and that's it. But beneath all of that is a central notion of an identity of what Gestalt therapy has been and continues to be. And that's the through line that I think people need to pay more attention to. I don't think that I'm thinking about, I do informal training. I train people who've been trained in other institutes. And I get a sense that there's a different sense of what a Gestalt therapy is, if there is any identity about what it means to be a Gestalt therapist.
Mhm. So it can be more than one identity of Gestalt therapist
Yeah,
for one person or general,
even one person,
even
you know,
one person.
at different points and different times, a person could identify with being a relational Gestalt therapist, whatever that means.
Yeah, yeah, I see, and I get your point. and I ask about development, how it developed during training, or maybe after training, or maybe even before. I don't know. What do you think about this development process of uh, forming this identity of Gestalt therapist?
Right. Some of it has to come from a personal therapy, what you find in your own personal Gestalt therapy. And at best, it's to encourage that development so that you can embody what Gestalt therapy has meant and means to you in a feelingful way. Uh, I can speak from my experience as a Gestalt therapist. Direct experience is my shift away from a sense of the individual model of Gestalt therapy into the more field emergent model of Gestalt therapy was a shift in my focus, my orientation, and my understanding of myself and Gestalt therapy in the world. Um, we I hope that people can be encouraged to continue to fold into their sense of what Gestalt therapy is, all of the changes and openness to the world that they're experiencing, so that um, who they are as a Gestalt therapist in year one of training, or the years before when they wanted to be a Gestalt therapist, and who they will be in 15 years will be changing. It has to change.
Mhm,
And to again find a way to incorporate that in the ongoing identity of what it means to be Gestalt therapy.
mhm. So it means that forming Gestalt therapy identity means changing of this identity. Yeah, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. It's not. It's an always changing identity.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
Otherwise, it's a fixity.
Hmm.
You always keep your eye out for when it becomes routine and stereotyped.
Hmm.
You know,
So this fixation, it's what not helping to forming this identity, right?
right.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a, I think it's something that Fritz wrote somewhere or said somewhere about Gestalt therapy as the an an ashtray and an empty chair because he was always smoking and then he always used the empty chair. So he said that's all you need for Gestalt therapy. Now some people
Hmm.
took that literally.
Hmm.
Unless you do chair work, in English that's
Hmm.
one word. It just
Hmm.
offends my notion of language. Unless you do chair work, you're not a Gestalt therapist.
Hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, let's speak about ethical questions and what ethical issues most commonly arise during the training process of your experience.
Well, the issue of how to manage dual relationships, which
Dual relationship.
yeah, he's my therapist, he's my supervisor, he's my trainer, he's my friend.
Hmm.
Um, that could get very confusing. Uh,
Hmm.
um, uh, Issues, and that's directly related to issues of power and rigidity. Uh, 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 I'm thinking about over the years how that showed itself up to how that showed itself to me in terms of sexual relations among people. Back in the earlier days of Gestalt therapy, everybody was having sex with everybody else. It was just
Hmm.
that it's done. Everybody everywhere was. Yeah.
Hmm.
And what were those implications? Then the shift away from that kind of boundary crossing because all of a sudden that kind of boundary meant something. Where
Hmm.
before to have it would be to be an introject. Uh,
Hmm.
uh, I'm thinking about other ethical questions. There are several ethical issues, and one is the kind of simple codes of conduct. How do you maintain your ethical status as a Gestalt therapist? I know that was very and has been very important for EAGT because the EAGT needed to establish a cross-national notion of Gestalt therapy that could be presentable to each of the countries. So they've developed this code of ethics. Then there's the kind of code of ethics that is more grounded in the foundation I've been saying about the issue of power. that in ethics that you can find grounded in my relationship. You know, ethics and relationship are overlapping. When ethics means moral, it's different. But when ethics is an embodied sense of the situation, it states a inevitable relationship to the other. Now that comes a little bit from philosophy, but an ethical stance is one that's not just about what is, but not just about how it is, but its effect on one another, because we always have an effect on the other. And to be
Mhm,
open to that is not just relational, but it's ethical.
mhm. Yeah, I see. And how you manage these issues? I hear that it's issues about double relationship, yeah, about abusing power, and something number three.
Also,
Yes.
I don't remember the third.
Okay, it's not
Thank
matter.
God it's recorded, huh?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry,
It's
ask
not
me to say
matter.
it
It's
again. Yeah, yeah.
it's
Go ahead.
interesting how you manage it, how you deal with it. I mean, like a teacher, you know, you teaching Gestalt therapists to manage this situation in their practice, and how you deal with it.
Yeah, by keeping my eye open, you know, that I have to, you know, that it's easy to be looked to as an authority in a fixed no in a fixed way rather than an authority in a fluid way. That if I say something, I have to be mindful that it's going to have an effect, and that how I say something is going to have an effect. And at the same time, I have to find a way to not inhibit myself so that I can be who I am, but also acknowledge that who I am is also a given of this particular situation. If a training situation, a supervision, or a or an actual psychotherapy situation, they have a lot in common, and each of them has a different uh, question, a different sensitivity, and a different openness. And I have to acknowledge that I am different in each, and the person is different in each. That requires keeping a careful eye because yeah. I'm thinking back about people I trained with, who made blunders, and how I'm trying my best not to do the same or similar things.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And is there anything you would like to change or reconsider in the existing Gestalt therapy training programs?
You know, I'm such an outsider that I have no uh, credentials or to criticize the other institutes. I can say generally, I would like them to pay more attention to writing, to thinking, and to studying, and to be attended to the ground of Gestalt therapy. Now, the words of Isidoor Fromm became to come to mind. He referred to serious Gestalt therapy as opposed to frivolous Gestalt therapy, unserious Gestalt therapy. And a serious Gestalt therapy acknowledges our roots, our deep roots, and the roots not as the dead ground, but it's the roots that provide the nourishment for the living things above it. You know, we cut off a plant from a root, withers. As our roots find them and know them and continue to draw from them and to build them together for the roots for the next. So that when training institutes train curriculum and not finding the continuity, if they do that, they're creating a tight notion of what Gestalt therapy is. Uh, yeah,
Mhm. And how do you see the development of Gestalt therapy in the near future?
that's a hard one because it's hard because I can only pay attention to what I'm doing. But let me think for a second. What I see is is more and more uh, connecting with other relational approaches, and I put that in quotes, relational approaches, more and more being fulfilled and discovering our roots as a common root and not be defensive. This is you ask for what I'm critical of. I'm very critical of what I call it sometimes the Gestalt exceptionalism. Now, there's a concept called American exceptionalism that we are the greatest country on earth. We're bringing everything to the world. We're very special in the American experience, and we're therefore the better. We're the best. Now, I have a sense in Gestalt therapists who get so self-involved with the miracles of Gestalt therapy, they think that we have the only uh, church to worship in. You know, God only appears within Gestalt therapy. Everybody else is kind of in their head,
It's
but
like, who is the smartest animal in the world? Human being. Who tell it?
yeah,
People.
well, yeah, yeah. I see the cat behind you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Ask a whale about what's happening on land, and it'll just say, "Oh God, you don't believe what they're doing now."
Mhm. Mhm. So, um, you think that Gestalt approach or institute or like schools don't need to think that they are best of the best. Yeah, that
Sure.
they need to mm, see more widely.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. Even though I may be, people may be hearing me saying that I'm the best, we're the best of the best. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
And you asked about the future of Gestalt therapy. I think a little bit more. I'm thinking about how more and more, as I can see it, in my organizations and societies are uh, um, connecting to the Gestalt therapy roots. I'm thinking about the field emergent self-study group that emerged. Thinking about the conferences that I go to where they have um, a lot of sense of their tradition. I know it's probably true more outside of the United States than it is in the United States. My experience of trainees is that those who trained elsewhere come in with a grounded notion of philosophy, phenomenology, psychology, literature, and that's not true for most American trainees. They roll their eyes. They know what I'm talking about. That's why I'm more, I think I'm more popular among Europeans than I am among people in the United States. I look at the
Mhm.
people at my webinars, I say, wait.
Mhm. And where are you conducting your training webinars in what countries, continents?
All online now. But right now, I have people in my webinars from China,
Wow.
Australia, all over Europe.
Mhm.
Nobody from Africa.
I searched Gestalt therapy training or institute in Africa, and I didn't found anything.
There has to be a reason. You know, I find that Gestalt therapy is different in each of the communities that I visit. I'm experiencing the model in China is different. It's closer to what I found in Eastern Europe is the focus on the we and I shifts a little bit. You know, people who grew up in a collectivist society have had enough we. They'd like to say a little bit more I.
Mhm.
And we in an I dominated culture say, whoa, I want to hear more we.
Mhm. 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 Yeah. Is there anything else you think it's important to know about Gestalt therapy trainings that we haven't speak about?
I'm just think, I'm sure there must be, but knowing that my perception comes from an informal training orientation, not about the nitty-gritty of how to get students, how to teach on a step-by-step basis. So I have that kind of a limitation in what I'm saying. Like even when I was teaching Pearl Cephalon and Goodman text line by line, and everybody had this. We were all different levels. It wasn't one level and next level, all in one level. When I learned Gestalt therapy, we're all on one level. There was no
Mhm.
advanced group, beginners group. You were all mixed together. So when
Mhm.
you were a beginner, you didn't know, frightened of saying three words. But that was the way we learned back then. So that's kind of when the way I train now. with all levels in one group. An exception is I'm doing a phenomenology webinar, and people are now in an advanced one, so because it gets more difficult, and it makes no sense to start there.
Mhm.
But otherwise, it's all. So I have that kind of limited myopic point of view. I can't um, give a meta criticism of Gestalt therapy training institutes.
Mhm.
I'd like them not to stop fighting among themselves, but that's, well, for God's sakes, analysts did that. It was not we're not the first modality to attack one another.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe it's our vitality.
yeah. Okay, thank you for your time and for your
Oh, my
answers.
pleasure. You might get a sense that I really enjoy interviews and
Mm,
discussions.
Me
It's
too. It was very interesting discussion.
nice. Be
Thank you.
well and be safe.
Yeah.